Hey guys, my name's Thomas Busby and welcome to part 4 of my series of Fujifilm's best lens for wildlife photography. Today's video isn't going to be a long one, but it's going to be a real good one. We're looking at the teleconverters, the 1.4s and the 2x, to see how much of an effect they have on every single lens combination we've been looking at throughout this series. Okay, let's start things off with some of the more obvious aspects of a teleconverter, what they do. Now the 1.4x teleconverter has two obvious effects. It will increase your zoom by 1.4 times. So a 100mm lens turns into a 140mm lens. A 200mm lens turns into a 280mm lens. It also will increase your aperture by 1.4 times. So an f10 lens will turn into an f14 lens. You get the difference. The 2x, pretty obvious as the title suggests. It increases everything by 2 times. So an f10 lens turns into an f20, an f4 lens turns into an f8, a 100mm lens turns into a 200mm lens. You are doubling everything. Now don't underestimate that increase in maximum aperture allowed, or the decrease in maximum aperture allowed. Having that less light come into your camera will increase the ISO you require, dropping the quality of your shot, or it will cause you to drop your shutter speed, increasing the high chance of your subject getting motion blur if they are moving. So a few things to be aware of. But what a lot of people don't talk about with these teleconverters is the other effects they have on your shots. I'm mostly talking about autofocus speed and sharpness. Actually, as a side note, as far as I can tell, these don't affect depth of field. So this might be a little bit complicated. So zoom and aperture will increase your depth of field, but I don't think these do. So just to explain that a little bit more, if you were shooting at 200mm at f8, and then shot again with the exact same lens at 100mm at f4, but with a 2x teleconverter, the shots, as far as I can tell, look exactly the same. Actually, I'll also quickly mention the 1.4x teleconverter that comes with the 200mm f2. As far as I can tell, there is no difference with this other than the colour. And that colour does have a little bit of effect. If you are out in stinking hot heat, having that lighter colour attracts heat less and will improve autofocus and just general quality of your shot by a little bit in that stinking hot conditions. Though this one, as far as autofocus goes, is really optimized to go with the 200mm f2 lens. If you'd like to see more about that autofocus performance, check out last week's video. Though the black 1.4x teleconverter doesn't work as well with the 200mm lens as the silver, the white one does. So clearly this one is optimized, this one is not. But as far as the only difference I could tell was just what aperture shows up on screen. But definitely autofocus performance with a 200mm with this lens, much better. So when it comes to autofocus speeds, if you haven't already watched last week's video, please do so, as I'm really going to blanket rule this information right now. And what I'm about to say might not apply exactly to your lens, but here we go. The 1.4x teleconverter will most likely make your lens focus 1.3 times slower and also improve the chances of you not getting your shot in focus by roughly 30%. The 2x teleconverter will have far less of an effect on your hit rate, but will reduce your AF speeds even more, making things take roughly 1.5 times longer. But I need to stress, that's kind of a blanket rule, and every single lens and how you focus affects those autofocus speeds uniquely. So like I said, please, if you haven't watched last week's video about autofocus, please go do that now. But autofocus doesn't affect all types of wildlife photography, especially if you're doing that more portrait style of photography, then getting as close as possible. Trying to frame that animal headshot is far more important than having phenomenally fast focus. So for example, like say a portrait versus an action, that close-up headshot. So what we care about more now is image quality. So how do these teleconverters affect the sharpness, the image quality out of every lens they can be paired with? Well, 2 weeks ago I shared a bunch of results about image quality out of each of these lenses, but those results did not include the teleconverters. So if we add both the 1.4x and the 2x to those results, things shape out like this. What we're looking at here is like a zoom versus sharpness ratio. And what's important to note here is that the lenses on the top of the list don't necessarily mean it's the best. You're far better to do the comparison based on how much zoom you need for the job you need to do. For example, the 200mm versus the 50-140 or the 1.4x teleconverter only works out about 7% worse as far as sharpness goes for nearly the same amount of reach. or the 100 to 400 versus the 200 millimeters with the 2 times teleconverter doesn't quite catch up at about 13% worse. Now when I say better and worse, we're only talking about image quality. We're not talking about autofocus speed or any other features, but just the amount of zoom you get for the quality you get. It's interesting numbers. But to really simplify the effect the teleconverters will have on the image quality of your lens, think of it like this. The 1.4 times teleconverter will reduce sharpness by about 10%, and the 2 times teleconverter will reduce sharpness by about 25%. And just to recap from before, the 1.4 reduces speed by about 1.3 times, though this is unique for every single lens, and increased miss rate by about 30%, where the 2 times will make it about 1.5 times slower and a 10% increase in misses. Now this isn't saying you're going to miss by 30 and 10%, it just increases your chance of missing by 30 and 10%. And with the exception to autofocus speed with the 200mm with its own 1.4 times teleconverter, that will not affect speed at all, but it still will reduce sharpness by 10%. Now I understand this could still be a little bit to take in. And wouldn't it be nice if someone just factored in like a zoom to quality ratio, giving a numerical result of which one gave you the best quality for the most zoom? But then factored in things like sharpness, weight, price, weather sealing, stabilizer, all the other features into one little simple number to tell you the best lens for any given wildlife photographic situation. Well, I've got your back. Please tune in next week, guys, as I finally announce Fujifilm's best lens for wildlife photography for multiple different wildlife photographic situations. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here, guys, please feel free to head over to my website and consider buying a print. Or if financially you're not in a situation to do that, all you need to do is like, share, and subscribe. As always, guys, it would mean the world to me. And until next time, I'll catch you next time.